Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Streamline English. I hope you are having a peaceful day. Find a soft, quiet place and let yourself settle. Breathe in slowly and gently out. Tonight's story begins with a very sad little girl and ends with one of the most remarkable lives in history. You don't need to understand every word. Just listen and let the story move you. She was born into one of the most privileged families in America. She would later live in the White House, the home of the President of the United States. She would travel the world, speak to millions, and help write a document that still protects every person on Earth today. But she began life afraid of almost everything. She was afraid of the dark. She was afraid of strangers. She was afraid of animals. She was afraid, above all, of being disliked. As a small girl, she was quiet and awkward and desperately lonely. Her own mother, beautiful and socially brilliant, was ashamed of her daughter's appearance and called her Granny, mocking her for being plain. She grew up feeling ugly, unloved, and invisible. And then, slowly, one small act of courage at a time, she remade herself. She stepped toward the things she feared. She forced herself to speak when she was terrified to speak. She entered rooms full of people when she wanted to run. She took on responsibility when she felt completely unqualified. She did, as she would later say, the thing you think you cannot do. And she became one of the most admired human beings of the 20th century. Her name was Eleanor Roosevelt, and this is her story. If you enjoy learning English through deeply human, true stories like this, please subscribe to Streamline English. It helps us keep these calm stories coming. Thank you, my friend. Our story begins in the year 1884 in the city of New York in the United States. A baby girl was born into the Roosevelt family, a wealthy and distinguished old New York family with connections to American politics, business, and high society. The baby was named Anna Eleanor Roosevelt. Her parents were beautiful, charming, and prominent in New York society. Her father, whom Eleanor adored, was warm and lively and kind. Her mother was stunning and socially gifted, and critical of her daughter in ways that left deep wounds. Eleanor's childhood was shadowed by sadness and loss. Her mother, who found Eleanor plain and awkward, was never truly warm toward her. Then, when Eleanor was still a small girl, her mother died. Her beloved father, who had been the light of her world, was struggling with serious illness and personal difficulties. He died not long after her mother. Eleanor was left an orphan at age 9, and she went to live with her maternal grandmother, who was a serious, somewhat cold woman, and who raised her in an atmosphere of duty and restraint, but not much warmth. So Eleanor grew up lonely, shy, afraid, and starved for the love and approval she had barely known. She felt, she later wrote, that she was an ugly duckling, a child who did not fit, who was not lovely like her mother or charming like her father, who could not find her place in the social world around her. She was terrified of almost everything, of horses, of the water, of strangers, of speaking in public, of being judged and found wanting. And yet, inside this frightened, lonely girl, there was something else, a deep moral seriousness, a genuine care for other people, a sense that the world contained suffering, and that suffering mattered. These qualities would, in time, prove far more valuable than all the beauty and social grace she had felt she lacked. When Eleanor was 14 years old, her life began to shift. Her grandmother sent her to a school in England, and there she encountered a teacher who would change her life. A remarkable woman named Marie Souvestre, who ran the school with intellectual rigor and genuine warmth, and who saw in the quiet anxious young Eleanor, something that few others had noticed. Marie Souvestre saw Eleanor's intelligence, her thoughtfulness, and her moral seriousness. She gave Eleanor her attention, her time, and her genuine admiration. She encouraged Eleanor to think, to read, to question, to form her own opinions. She took Eleanor to travel in Europe during the school holidays, and through these journeys, Eleanor began to open up to the world. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt seen and valued for who she genuinely was. It was transformative. Those years at Marie Souvestre's school gave Eleanor something she had never had, a sense of her own worth. She returned to America and entered the world of New York society. She married her distant cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a handsome and charming young man of excellent family. Their marriage would be a complicated one. Franklin was brilliant and sociable, but he was not always faithful, and Eleanor would learn painful truths about her marriage as the years passed. Their relationship would evolve, over time, into something more like a deep and productive partnership than a conventional romance. As Franklin's political career rose, through the New York State Senate, to the role of Assistant Secretary of the Navy, toward a run for the vice presidency, Eleanor was expected to be a quiet, gracious political wife. But quiet was not, in the end, who Eleanor was going to be. Eleanor entered public life reluctantly, pushed by circumstances and by her own deepening sense of responsibility. She joined organizations that worked for the poor, for working people, for women's rights. She became involved in political campaigns and causes. Then, in 1921, her husband Franklin was struck by polio, a serious infectious disease that can paralyze the body. Franklin lost the use of his legs. Some believed that his political career was over. Eleanor, now faced with a husband who was profoundly disabled, made a crucial decision. She threw herself into political life on his behalf, campaigning, speaking, building relationships, to keep Franklin's political presence alive. She was terrified of public speaking. She was awkward and nervous in front of crowds. She had a high-pitched, trembling voice at first, but she pushed forward anyway. She found teachers who helped her speak more effectively. She practiced. She made herself do it, again and again, even when she was frightened. And gradually, through sheer determination and effort, she transformed herself from a nervous, awkward public speaker into a powerful, effective one. And something else happened along the way. She discovered that she had opinions, and that those opinions mattered. She was passionate about the rights of women, about the rights of Black Americans who were still suffering under systematic discrimination, about the rights of working people and poor people, and she began to speak about these things, loudly and clearly, in ways that were genuinely brave and sometimes controversial. In 1932, Franklin Roosevelt was elected President of the United States, and Eleanor became the First Lady, the wife of the President. But Eleanor would not be an ordinary First Lady. Previous First Ladies had played largely ceremonial roles, hosting dinners and representing the President's family in social settings. Eleanor redefined the position entirely. She held her own press conferences, something no First Lady had done before. She had her own newspaper column, which she wrote every day, in which she shared her thoughts, her travels, her convictions. She traveled the country, and eventually the world, visiting communities, meeting ordinary people, seeing the conditions in which the poor and the marginalized actually lived. During the Great Depression, the devastating economic crisis of the 1930s, in which millions of Americans lost their jobs, their homes, and their savings, Eleanor was the eyes and ears of a president who could not easily travel. She went everywhere. She visited the rural poor, the unemployed, the desperate, and she came back and told Franklin and his administration what she had seen and heard. She was, in a real sense, the most connected person in the government to the actual suffering of ordinary Americans. And during the Second World War, the global conflict that lasted from 1939 to 1945, Eleanor continued her advocacy. She worked tirelessly on behalf of Black American soldiers who were fighting for a country that still treated them as second-class citizens. She pushed for women's inclusion in the workforce. She spoke up for refugees, people forced to flee their homes due to war or persecution, at a time when many governments were shutting them out. She was not always successful. Some battles she won, others she lost. But she never stopped fighting. When Franklin Roosevelt died in 1945, Eleanor was 60 years old. She might have retired from public life. Instead, she took on perhaps her greatest role. President Harry Truman appointed her as one of the first United States delegates to the newly formed United Nations, the international organization created after World War II, in which the nations of the world would come together to work for peace and human rights. A delegate is a person officially representing their country or organization in a meeting or body. And at the United Nations, Eleanor was given the chairmanship of the commission tasked with drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that would attempt to define the rights that belong to every human being on Earth, regardless of nationality, race, gender, religion, or any other characteristic. It was an enormous task. The commission included representatives from many different countries with very different political systems and cultural traditions. Finding language that all of them could accept, that was meaningful and strong enough to actually protect people, was an enormous diplomatic challenge. Eleanor threw herself into it with everything she had, working long hours, negotiating with difficult delegates, pushing for strong and clear language. In December 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations. It begins with the words, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights." Those words, and the 30 articles that follow them, have served as a foundation for international human rights law ever since. Every international human rights treaty, every declaration, every court case that invokes the rights of human beings, builds on the foundation that Eleanor and her colleagues laid in that document. Eleanor continued her work for civil rights, for peace, for the United Nations ideals, until her health finally gave out. She died in 1962, at the age of 78. She had been afraid of almost everything, and she had done almost everything. Eleanor Roosevelt's life is one of the most powerful examples I know of what can be done when we refuse to be defined by our fears. She was afraid of horses, and she learned to ride. She was afraid of public speaking, and she became one of the most powerful voices of her century. She was afraid of being disliked, and she said things that made many powerful people very angry because they were true and needed saying. She did not overcome her fears by becoming fearless. She overcame them by acting in spite of her fear, by deciding that what needed to be done was more important than how afraid she felt. She is perhaps best known for a phrase that she either said or inspired. Different sources attribute it in different ways, but the idea is completely hers. Do the thing you think you cannot do. Not wait until you're not afraid. Not wait until you feel ready. Do it anyway. The courage comes after the action, not before. And her second great lesson is about the power of genuine caring. Eleanor cared, deeply and personally, about the suffering of others, not in an abstract, distant way, but in a way that made her get on trains and buses and go and see, and listen, and touch the reality of other people's lives. That caring is what made her so effective. It is hard to dismiss someone who has sat with you in your kitchen and heard your story. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more than the fear. So tonight, before you rest, let me share a gentle thought. Eleanor Roosevelt was afraid for most of her life, of the very things she needed to do. And she did them anyway, one at a time, each one making the next one a little less frightening. Learning a language asks something very similar of you. There will be moments when you want to speak English, but you are afraid of making mistakes, of sounding foolish, of not being understood. You will want to wait until you feel ready, until you feel safe, until the fear goes away. But take it from Eleanor, the fear rarely goes away before the action. You must do the thing while you are still afraid. And each time you do, each time you open your mouth and try, even imperfectly, even fearfully, you become a little braver. The courage comes after the act, not before. Do the thing you think you cannot do, my friend. It works for language learning, just as it worked for Eleanor. One brave attempt at a time. If this story moved you, please give it a like and subscribe to Streamline English. It truly helps us grow. And tell me in the comments, what is one thing you were afraid to do that you did anyway, and how did it feel? Until next time, my friend, do the thing you think you cannot do, and have a wonderful day.